Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I have a Newton's Nook design card for the Newton's Nook Design blog. I will be using a couple of different stamp sets, including their Falling into Autumn stamp set, which features several leaves and is primarily designed for autumn and fall cards, but I wanted to show you that it could be used year-round. I'm taking two of the more general looking leaves from the stamp set and combining them with the very tropical looking solid leaf from the Wild Child stamp set, in order to give it less of a fall feeling and more of just a general leaf feeling. I'm going to be using them in a wreath pattern, and I'm going to be taking the owl from Sweetheart Tales and perching him onto the wreath. I started by making the wreath on a separate piece of cardstock just to make sure that my idea for how it would come out worked, and so you saw that there, how it looks in the end. But to start off, what I'm going to do is take a circle die, or any circular object would do, and trace it lightly with pencil to give me a guide for laying out the leaves in the wreath so that it will stay circular the whole time. It's important to use a light touch with the pencil because you're going to erase these lines eventually, and if you press too much into the paper, you'll be able to see that impression. However, you will be able to easily erase pencil through the dye ink that I'm using. I'm using Hero Arts shadow inks. I decide to mostly use the Green Hills shadow ink because I want it, again, to stay away from the dark colors that we associate more with fall and winter and bring it to a little bit more of a springy feel with some lighter colors. With the shadow inks, they dry a little bit lighter than they stamp, and they also get more even as they dry. So you see that when I stamp them down, they look quite dark and a little bit splotchy, but from what you saw with the one that was already finished, it dries much more evenly and a little bit lighter. When making a wreath, it's important that all of the leaves are going the same way because that's what it looks like in nature. All of the branches, all the leaves on the branch face in the same direction, and so if you want to make it look more realistic, the best thing to do is to make all of the leaves ends point in the same way. I'm going around the circle in a pattern using the more solid leaf with the straight lines and then the curled leaf. The placing is a little bit tricky, but I found that what was best to do was to get most of the way around the wreath and then to start back at the beginning going backwards, and it helped me figure out the placement a little bit better, but it's a little bit of trial and error as well. I also wanted to add in these tropical leaves from Wild Child, like I mentioned before, but I am using the slightly darker Forest Hills ink because I want to make sure that they pop a little bit, and since it was only an accent, I added 3 of them in a triangle pattern. There is another small leaf from the Falling into Autumn stamp set, which would allow you to add a dark accent if that's what you wanted, but it does look slightly more fall to me, and that's why I went with the Wild Child leaf instead. Now, to make this card into a Valentine's card, instead of using berries like you might at Christmas and make a wreath, I'm using the little hearts. I'm using a deep red ink because when I think of Valentine's Day, I think of red, but then the red and green made it a little too Christmassy to me, and so in retrospect I think I would have gone with a different color that was more Valentine's, like maybe a pink, if I could find a dark pink, or a purple, so that way it had the feel of Valentine's Day and not so much Christmas. As it turns out, slightly Christmassy because of the color scheme. I want to use the owl on the wreath, and originally I thought I would use just one owl, but I wound up stamping out 2 because I had both wreaths already assembled and figured I would just make 2 cards. But after I colored them both in, I thought it would be cute if they were facing each other, and it would build in more of this love theme and make it lean more towards Valentine's Day. I'm going to fussy cut out these owls. They're actually quite simple to fussy cut, and to make it even simpler, I usually just cut off their feet because cutting around all the little details in their talons would be kind of time consuming, and so in order to make it easier, I just cut those right off, and it still looks good. I think of it as maybe they were kind of like buried inside the leaves, for instance, but to color it, I'm using E33, 37, and 35. I'm using the darker color for most of his body, and then the lighter colors in a pattern on the stomach and on the face where the eyes are. I find that using the lighter color is better by his face because if you use too dark of a color, you can lose some of the detail in the eyes as they faded. I am just adding a little YR68 to the nose, and I color both of them the same way. I fussy cut them out, like I said, taking off those feet to make it a little bit easier, and I'm going to use both on the same card. When I'm sure that the ink is completely dry, I'm going to go in and erase that pencil line that I started with as my guide. I would suggest waiting a few minutes between stamping and erasing, because until the ink is completely dry, if you take the eraser to it, you could smudge the ink and lose some of the detail. So if you have another task to do in between, like I did with the coloring, so that I made sure that I didn't touch it. It's something important not to be too impatient with it. Once I decided to put both owls on the wreath, I thought that it would look cute to also have some hearts in between them, and to make sure that they leaned a little bit into each other. I'm going to pop them up with foam tape to add some detail, because right now this card is relatively flat as all of the stamping is on the one panel, and I want to make sure that there's always just a touch of interest, since there isn't going to be a lot of embellishment happening in this card. I really want the wreath and the owls to stand out and be the centerpiece of the card, so I won't be adding any ribbon or anything like that. Once I have them complete and I'm looking at the wreath, I think that the bottom is a little bit too plain. That love always sentiment is very small and scripty, which is beautiful, but doesn't quite have enough weight to balance out the wreath. So I decide to add this heart border from the Sweetheart Tales set on each side of it to give it a little bit more weight there on the bottom of the card, and it's a good mixture of solid and outline hearts. I really like this border in the set because I find that it's often useful to help create background patterns or to add great detail to stamps. One of the best things about Newton's Nook stamps are all the little tiny detail stamps included with each set. So once I have that stamped in the same red ink that I've been using for all the other elements, I decide to back it onto some red paper. Again, this might have been another time to pull in a slightly different color, because the more red I put with the green, the more Christmassy it looks. So I would suggest maybe, trying a different color scheme. I'm going to add just a little bit of detail because I want the hearts that are between the owls to stand out a little bit more. And so I'm going to add some stickles to them. And then I also decided to add a touch of stickles to the hearts along the bottom, because once I get going with stickles, I tend to like to add it to several places. And again, it creates that sense of balance between the top of the card and the bottom of the card, because there's a little bit of stickles in each place. And so that's it for my card today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in more crafty videos, you can subscribe to my channel. I'm going to leave you a link to the products in the description below, along with a link to the Newton's Nook blog, where you can check out more of their awesome stamps. Thanks for watching. Bye.